Alright friends, so let's begin talking about this network automation thing. Alright, so to begin, we kind of want to know, why do we even want to automate our networks? Well, we can figure that out by going back to the way things used to be done. So how was that? Okay, so let's just say, well, take it this, okay, we've got an example here of a device. Typically, what you would do would be, well, you might grab a console cable. So this would be a physical cable that you would just plug directly into the device, give you a physical connection, and you could have a little laptop here, and on that laptop you could begin typing commands to begin provisioning and configuring this device, bringing it online, having all the configs it needs, and then what you would do is you would just unplug that device. Okay, so you unplug, you would then take your laptop, plug the console cable into the next device, like this guy right here, and you'd do the same type of thing. You'd begin typing in the commands one by one, eventually bringing this device also online. And if you only had two devices in your network, well, everything was a-okay. This is not so much of a problem. The issue is though, is that many networks have a lot more than two devices. If you have maybe say 20 devices or 100 devices, 1,000 devices, maybe even 20,000 devices, you can imagine this is not the way to go. Now, just before we kick on to the automation part, what we can also do is, once the device is actually reachable and up and running, so it's got an IP address, it's got SSH credentials configured, what you can do is then remotely log in and manage that device. So say for example, this is you here. This could be your laptop, as opposed to having to go and physically connect into the device. What you could just do is go and create an SSH connection to that device and begin making the config changes. Same again, once you're done, log into the next device over SSH and begin making any updates to the configuration. Makes sense. Again, same problem though. Whilst we're having remote access here, in order to actually make changes to all your entire network, you're having to do things one by one. This is really not so good, especially given the fact that you are absolutely vulnerable, the same way all of us are vulnerable to the idea of human error. What does that mean? Well, it means we can do things like fat fingering commands. You could perhaps mean to type the IP address of 1.1.1.1, but instead you happen to type 1.11.1.1, okay? Really quite easy to do. And especially when you're working under pressure where you have to really get a change out or a fix out, these types of mistakes are much more likely, and it just makes it so hard to find out what the issue is when you've went and configured 50 new devices and there is one small error and it's really breaking the entire network. So what we want here is a better solution, and this is the idea of automation. Automation is going to allow us to use programming languages such as, say for example, Python, whereby we can actually connect to our devices in a much more efficient way. And this really is the benefit of using automation when you happen to have repetitive tasks. Say for example, you're having to go to all your devices, maybe you want to update some VLAN configurations. Let's maybe say you want to add VLAN 15 to all devices in your network, as opposed to logging into each device one by one and just typing the same commands. In the case of Cisco, first typing the enable command, then the configure terminal command, and then issuing the command VLAN 15, and then just doing this over and over again. With automation, you could just have the same template here, and you could have the automation system right here just push that command out, or those commands out, should I say, to all devices in the network that should have those commands applied. So really the idea of automation is we're going to have a great reduction in human error, because we're not going about typing all the commands one by one, and we're also able to make our changes much quicker. Now, just to be clear here, this is often what people think about when they think about automation. They assume that we're just talking about configuration changes, you know, maybe updating VLAN information, maybe changing IP address information, that type of stuff. Now, to be clear, that is absolutely something you can do with automation. It's very valuable. However, one of the best things that you can do with automation is simply using the automation tool to validate your configurations. Think about it. Given the fact that your automation tool is so powerful, it can make so many changes so quickly to so many devices. This can inherently mean that the automation system actually can be pretty dangerous if it's not used correctly. Just in the same way that you can use the system to push out these necessary changes, if you still happen to make a mistake, what you can do is supercharge that mistake and push it out to many more devices, and well, you can kind of melt down your network. That said though, if you are just using automation to validate your configurations, and this by the way is what so many organizations actually start out with, they don't actually make config changes until they get really quite comfortable. what they first start automating is simply these read-only operations. So what might that look like? Well, it might be using the automation system to go and query all the devices in your network and ask particular questions. You know, things like, are all my OSPF adjacencies in the full states? And if they're not, give me an alert, tell me which devices are not compliant and on which interfaces. We can also ask things like how many routes are in the routing table for each device. Is it actually matching what we should expect to see? Here's a good one. What if we ask the question, are there any duplicate IP addresses in the entire network? Perhaps we went on to one interface of one device and accidentally typed in the IP address that is already being used, as opposed to you having to log in manually and run a command to check all the IP addressing across all the interfaces and do it across all the devices in your network, trying to correlate each IP address and notice any duplicates. Instead, with automation, this type of thing can be done really easily, okay? Now, like I just hinted at, one of the main ways that people tend to automate is by using the Python programming language. And quite honestly, this is one of my favorite ways to automate. It's super powerful and very flexible. However, it does require that you understand how to program in Python. That can be a little bit of a hurdle if you're just new to this particular concept of network automation. Now, the good news is that by far and away, the most popular way to automate your network is in fact to use Ansible. So the question is, what exactly is Ansible and why is it so popular? So how about we talk about that in the very next video.
Thanks for watching. If you're interested in a career in IT or just looking to brush up your IT skills, then be sure to visit cbtnuggets.com for a free trial.